Right. Let's dive into this trade war thing, huh? Specifically, those tariffs President Trump just slapped on Canada, Mexico, and China. We're looking at news clips, policy analysis, even some social media chatter, to get a feel for the temperature out there.
Yeah, it's one of those things that even if you aren't, working on Wall Street every day, it's something that really can impact your everyday life.
Absolutely.
It ripples through.
So we've got three big things to get started with here.
Right.
First off, it looks like President Trump's taking a much more aggressive stance on trade here in his second term.
Yeah.
We're seeing these sweeping tariffs. It almost feels like a shoot first and ask questions later approach,
Yeah.
which is a pretty big change from how he handled things in his first term. It was a lot more targeted back then.
Then the thing is like countries like China and Mexico, they've had time to prepare countermeasures,
Oh, interesting.
So this isn't a surprise attack anymore, which, could make this a lot more complex and impactful than what we've seen in the past.
Okay, so that's point number two.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets real for all of us, right?
Okay.
Inflation, everyone's talking about it, everyone's feeling it,
Right.
which means every time prices go up, everyone freaks out.
Sure.
So if these tariffs push prices up even more, well, politically, that could be a real powder keg.
Oh, absolutely.
So with all that in mind, let's dig into some of the arguments behind these tariffs.
Okay.
President Trump keeps saying trade deficits, especially with Canada and China, are proof of unfair trade practices.
Right.
And he keeps bringing up this $200 billion trade deficit with Canada. But when you look at the actual U.S. Census Bureau data from 2024, it's more like $63 billion. So where's this $200 billion coming from? Is he just making stuff up?
Well, it's possible he's talking about the total deficit over several years, but even then, it's a huge exaggeration. And here's the thing, that deficit is mostly because the U.S. buys a lot of oil from Canada.
Oh, okay.
If you take oil out of the equation, the U.S. actually has a trade surplus with Canada. Like, we're selling them more than we're buying from them by about $45 billion.
Okay, so the trade deficit argument with Canada doesn't really hold water.
Right.
What about the other reasons for these tariffs, like fentanyl and illegal immigration?
Well, yeah, those were some of the first things he mentioned. He even said on social media that the tariffs would stay in place until these issues were resolved.
I saw that.
But here's where it gets interesting. The U.S. northern border, that's where most of this is supposedly coming from, accounts for less than 7% of all migrant encounters and a tiny fraction of the fentanyl that's seized.
So if Canada and Mexico aren't the main culprits here, why hit them with these tariffs? Seems a little extreme, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does feel like, using a sledgehammer to kill a fly or something.
Right.
But it really seems like these tariffs are more of a negotiating tactic. After President Trump talked to the Canadian Prime Minister on the phone, the tariffs were delayed by 30 days. Canada agreed to work with us on a joint task force to fight fentanyl trafficking and reaffirm their commitment to border security, but they were already doing those things before the tariffs even came up.
So is this all just a power play then? Slapping tariffs on to force concessions,
Okay.
even if the original reasons don't add up?
Well, it's something we've seen before.
Yeah.
Remember the steel and aluminum tariffs back in 2018?
Oh, yeah.
He put those on Canada and Mexico too, and then lifted them less than a year later.
Right. There's definitely a pattern there. But let's say these tariffs actually do happen. What are the real-world consequences? This can't just be some game of economic chicken with no one getting hurt.
Right. No, not at all. The impact on some key industries is a big worry.
Right.
We're talking disruptions to things like, energy, automotive, lumber, even dairy.
Wow.
And these industries are all connected.
Yeah.
So a price shock in one area can quickly spread throughout the whole economy.
Can you give us an example of how that might actually play out in real life?
Sure. Let's look at the car industry, for instance. Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. all work together to make cars.
Okay.
A single car can cross the border several times as it's being built. Now, if you add tariffs at each step, that adds a lot of cost, and that ends up making cars more expensive for everyone who wants to buy one.
So these tariffs are like a hidden tax on regular people buying cars, groceries, basically anything that's affected.
Exactly. And the car industry is just one example. We see the same thing happening in the energy sector.
Okay.
Canada's a big supplier of oil to the U.S.
Yeah.
And even though the U.S. produces a lot of oil, we still depend a lot on imports, especially the heavy crude that Canada sends us. TD Bank estimates that these tariffs could make gas prices jump by 30 to 70 cents a gallon.
Ouch. That's a big hit at the pump.
Yeah.
And it's not just gas,
Yeah.
right?
No.
Anything that needs to be transported or uses oil-based products is going to get more expensive. And that brings up another important point, the potential for big economic trouble.
Yeah.
If these tariffs make Canada and Mexico retaliate, we're looking at a full-blown trade war.
We are.
So how bad could the economic damage get? Are we talking recession-level bad?
Well, the Peterson Institute for International Economics has run some models, and their predictions are pretty grim.
Oh, boy.
They think these tariffs and the retaliation could cut U.S. GDP growth by as much as 0.5 percentage point in 2026.
And what about jobs? That's always a big talking point when it comes to tariffs.
Right. Well, S&P Global is predicting that U.S. unemployment could go up by a whole 2 percentage points in 2025. And the main reason for that would be disruptions to those supply chains we were just talking about. Companies that rely on imports from Canada and Mexico are going to have much higher costs, which could lead to layoffs.
So while everyone's talking about how tariffs will protect American jobs, it seems like they could actually cause job losses in other areas. It's all connected in a very complex way.
It certainly isn't a simple equation.
Yeah.
And we have to remember, this isn't just an American problem. Canada would probably experience even worse economic damage. The Bank of Canada thinks their GDP growth could plummet by 2.5 percentage points in the first year of a trade war with the U.S.
Wow, that's a huge impact. It really shows how closely tied our economies are.
Yeah, and the effects would go way beyond North America.
Of course, yeah.
This isn't just a regional issue.
Right.
It has global implications.
All right, before we go too far down that road, let's take a step back and see where we are. We've established that these tariffs are a big change in President Trump's approach to trade.
Definitely.
He's gotten much more aggressive. But the reasons he's given, especially when it comes to Canada, don't really match the data.
Right.
And we've also seen that a full-blown trade war could have some serious consequences.
Yeah.
Both the U.S. and Canada could see their economies shrink, jobs could be lost, and prices could go up for everyone.
Absolutely.
So the stakes are high. And we've only just started to scratch the surface of this issue. We still haven't even touched on how the financial markets are reacting to all of this.
Yeah, that's right. And the market's reaction, or the lack of reaction, is another interesting piece of this whole puzzle that we need to look at. So yeah, before the break, we were talking about, all the potential problems these tariffs could cause.
Yeah, it's starting to feel less like a dip in the pool and more like we're caught in a financial hurricane.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Right.
And speaking of navigating, you were mentioning the financial markets.
Yeah.
Since the tariffs were announced, things have been pretty quiet.
Yeah, and that surprised me. It's like the markets don't even believe President Trump. Are they just missing the risk here, or what's going on?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are a couple of explanations. One idea is that investors think this will all blow over quickly,
Okay.
that these tariffs are just a bluff, and President Trump will back down like we've seen before.
Like with those steel and aluminum tariffs he imposed back in 2018. He went after Canada and Mexico then too, but ended up getting rid of them pretty quickly.
Exactly, and that's probably playing a role in how the market's feeling right now.
Okay.
But there's another big factor we got to talk about. The Federal Reserve, the Fed.
Oh, right, the Fed.
They control interest rates, and those rates have a huge impact on the economy.
Of course. But how does that tie in with these tariffs?
Well, the Fed has been raising interest rates throughout the year to fight inflation.
Okay.
It's a tool they call quantitative tightening, which basically slows the economy down by making it harder to borrow money.
Okay.
This could help balance out the rising prices from the tariffs on all those imports, but it could also make the economy grow even slower.
So they're walking a tightrope, trying to stop inflation without crashing the whole economy.
That's it, exactly.
Okay.
And it looks like the market has faith in the Fed to handle this tricky situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that confidence is probably helping to keep people from panicking about the tariffs.
So maybe the markets aren't freaking out yet, but that doesn't mean we're in the clear.
Right.
I'm still worried about what these tariffs will do in the long run. It feels like we're heading towards a world where global trade is just choked by barriers and tariffs.
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
This trade war with Canada and Mexico is especially worrisome, It throws away decades of cooperation and integration.
Yeah.
We've carefully built these supply chains that cross borders, and now they're in danger.
Yeah, and it's not just about the money. There's the whole global politics angle, too.
Right.
If the U.S. turns its back on its closest allies, what message does that send to the rest of the world?
Well, it creates a lot of uncertainty and instability,
Yeah.
making it much tougher to work together on the big problems. Things like climate change, pandemics, and, just economic inequality. You
Yeah.
need cooperation to deal with that kind of stuff.
So we could end up hurting our economy and damaging global cooperation at the same time.
It's not a good situation.
Not good at all.
And we have to remember that tariffs aren't some magic solution.
Right.
They might give a short-term boost to some U.S. industries, but that usually comes at the cost of consumers and the overall efficiency of the economy.
It's like using duct tape to fix a crack in your foundation.
Oh.
Right. It might hide it for a little bit, but you're not really solving the problem, and you could even make things worse.
Exactly. Which leads us back to that basic question.
Yeah.
Are these tariffs really about fighting unfair trade, or is it all just a political show?
Well, the timing is pretty suspicious, right?
Yeah.
The USMCA, the trade deal that replaced NAFTA, is up for renegotiation in 2026. So it does kind of feel like President Trump's using these tariffs to strong-arm Canada and Mexico into giving him what he wants in those negotiations.
That's a very likely scenario. He wants to look tough on trade,
Right.
using these tariffs as bargaining chips.
So we're all pawns in this big economic chess game.
And unfortunately, this isn't just a game.
Yep.
There are very real consequences. Businesses are already struggling with the uncertainty, consumers are getting ready for higher prices, and the global economy is looking more and more uncertain.
So what does this all mean for our listeners? What can they actually do to prepare for this potential economic storm?
Well, it's impossible to say exactly how this trade war will play out.
Right.
But there are some smart moves you can make to, protect yourself. Diversification is key.
Okay.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak.
So for investors, that means spreading your investments across different assets and in different parts of the world.
Exactly. That way, if one part of your portfolio gets hit hard by the trade war, you'll have other investments to soften the blow.
Okay. What about those of us who aren't, hardcore investors? What can we do?
Well, it's all about being careful with your spending.
Right.
If the tariffs make prices go up, you might need to adjust your budget. Think about cutting back on things you don't really need and focus on the essentials.
Solid advice.
Mm.
And of course, staying informed is important too, right?
Absolutely.
Keep track of what's happening with the trade war and be ready to change your plans as needed.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, especially when things are uncertain.
Yeah.
The more you understand about what's going on, the better decisions you can make.
So stay curious, stay informed, and we'll help you navigate this whole mess.
Right.
Before we wrap up, there's one more thing I wanted to talk about. The long-term effects of this trade war. Could this actually change the global economy?
Ooh, that's a big question.
Right.
And a very important one. As we've seen, the global economy is all interconnected.
Yeah.
When one part gets disrupted, the effects can be felt everywhere.
Yeah, it's like one of those giant Jenga towers. You pull out one block and the whole thing could come crashing down.
And this trade war is pulling out some pretty big blocks.
Right.
If things keep escalating, it could trigger a whole bunch of protectionist measures all over the world,
Right.
leading to a breakdown of global trade.
So we could end up with a world divided by trade barriers, with every country looking out for itself.
Yeah. It's a grim picture, but it's becoming more and more likely.
And that would have serious consequences for innovation, economic growth, and global cooperation.
Exactly. In a fragmented world, it becomes way harder to share ideas, invest across borders, and tackle those big global challenges we were talking about.
So we're potentially talking about a future where economic progress just stops, innovation is stifled, and global problems become even harder to solve.
It's definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
And it highlights the urgent need to find a way to a more cooperative and open global trading system.
We need to find a way to balance the real concerns about trade imbalances and unfair practices with the need for a system that encourages growth and innovation.
Absolutely. And that's going to require open dialogue, compromise, and a genuine commitment to finding solutions that work for everyone.
Which is a tall order, especially in the current political climate, where everyone seems to be doubling down on their own positions.
It is indeed, but the alternative, a world broken up by economic walls, is a much worse outcome.
Yeah, no one wants that.
So we've explored the immediate effects of these tariffs, the potential for economic chaos, and the long-term consequences for the global trading system.
It's been a lot to take in, but I think we've managed to shed some light on the main issues.
And the most important thing to remember is that this trade war is far from over.
Right.
Things are constantly changing. It could escalate or it could de-escalate. Staying informed is key, as is thoughtful financial planning and diversification.
So we're not out of the woods yet, But with the right knowledge and preparation, we can get through this.
And maybe even come out of it with a better understanding of how important a fair and open global trading system is.
Okay, before we go, I want to leave you with one last thought.
Okay.
In a world that's increasingly connected, can protectionist policies like these tariffs really achieve what they're supposed to? Or do they end up causing more harm than good?
That's a question worth thinking about.
Yeah.
And it's something we'll keep exploring in future deep dives.
Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you on our next adventure into the world's most fascinating topics. So, we were talking about how these trade wars could completely change the global economy. Kind of a scary thought, really.
It is, yeah. And it reminds me of a specific example that really shows what could happen. Rare earth minerals.
Rare earth minerals, huh? I'll be
Yeah.
honest, not something I think about every day.
I get it. But these minerals, they're essential parts of a lot of technology we use, like everything from our smartphones and electric cars to even like high-tech weapons systems.
So they're a pretty big deal, even if most people don't know about them.
Exactly. And here's the thing. China pretty much controls the global production of these minerals.
Ah, I see where you're going with this. So if we try to separate our economy from China's, like some people are saying we should, we could end up cutting ourselves off from these really important materials.
Exactly. And that could have a huge impact on a bunch of industries. We could see prices skyrocket and supply chains for important stuff could get messed up.
So this isn't just about economics, then. It's about national security, too.
Absolutely. It's this whole tangled web of interconnected problems, and it really shows why we need a smarter, more nuanced approach to trade policy. One that looks at the immediate impact on the economy, but also thinks about the bigger picture, the geopolitical stuff.
Right, we can't just throw tariffs around like it's nothing and expect everything to work out perfectly for us.
Exactly. It needs to be a balanced approach.
Hmm.
One that takes care of our interests here at home, but also understands that working with other countries is important.
This whole deep dive has really been eye-opening. It seems like these trade wars are a real turning point, and the decisions we make now are going to have ripple effects for years to come.
No doubt about it. And it shows that we all have a part to play in shaping the future. Stay informed about these issues, talk to people, and let your elected officials know what you think.
This isn't just some abstract economic theory we're talking about. This stuff has real-world effects on our jobs, our money, our future. We can't just sit back and watch this all unfold.
I completely agree. So to all our listeners out there, stay curious, stay involved, and keep asking the tough questions. We'll keep digging into these complex topics and more in our future deep dives.
And until then, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the things that matter most.